Middle East crisis live. Israel's killing of 3 journalists is a war crime, says Lebanese minister. In a shocking escalation of violence, an Israeli airstrike early on Friday morning has reportedly killed at least 3 media staff in southern Lebanon. The attack targeted a guest house where multiple journalists were staying, and it has been described by Lebanese media as a deliberate act against those working in the media. The victims include Ghassan Najjar, a camera operator for the pro-Iran Al Mayadeen, and engineer Mohammed Rida, also from Al Mayadeen, alongside camera operator Wissam Qasim, who worked for Hezbollah's Al Mana. Reports indicate that the specific bungalow housing these media personnel was directly hit during the airstrike. Lebanon's Minister of Information, Ziad Makari, has condemned the attack, declaring it a war crime. In a post on X, he expressed outrage, stating that the Israeli forces chose to strike while the journalists were asleep, describing it as a betrayal that involved premeditated monitoring and tracking. He emphasized that there were a total of 18 journalists present at the site, representing 7 different media outlets, making the act even more egregious in terms of targeting press members. Diplomatic developments. This attack occurs amid rising tensions as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is scheduled to meet with Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati in London on Friday, along with the foreign ministers of Jordan and the United Arab Emirates. The discussions will focus on a post-war plan for Gaza, as indicated by the State Department. Blinken remarked that he hopes Iran receives a clear warning that any further attacks on Israel could jeopardize its own interests. This comes on the heels of Israel's commitment to retaliate against Iran following a missile barrage on October 1st. Furthermore, Israel has announced that the chief of its Mossad intelligence agency, David Barnea, will visit Doha on Sunday to engage in talks with CIA Director William Burns and Qatar's Prime Minister. This meeting is part of long-stalled efforts to negotiate a resolution to the ongoing Gaza war, which appears to be gaining tentative momentum. The discussions are expected to explore various options for beginning negotiations for the release of hostages held by Hamas, reflecting the urgency of the situation on the ground. Previous attempts at reaching a ceasefire and establishing a deal for the release of hostages have repeatedly fallen short, illustrating the complexities of the ongoing conflict. Humanitarian impact. In the context of these military actions, a tragic incident was reported where at least 17 people, primarily women and children, were killed in Israeli bombings targeting a school converted into a shelter in the Nuseirat refugee camp in central Gaza. Medical sources in the territory stated that another 42 individuals were injured in this strike, further complicating an already dire humanitarian situation. Among the deceased were 13 children under the age of 18 and 3 women, emphasizing the devastating impact on innocent civilians. The Israeli military justified the strike by claiming that the school was being utilized as a Hamas command and control center, a justification that has drawn significant criticism from various humanitarian organizations. As tensions rise, Iran has instructed its armed forces to be prepared for potential war but has also expressed a desire to avoid direct conflict, especially given the devastation witnessed among its allies in both Lebanon and Gaza. Reports from the New York Times cite Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei ordering military strategists to devise multiple plans for responding to potential Israeli attacks, with the scope of any retaliation largely contingent upon the intensity of Israel's military actions. Ongoing military operations. In the past few days, several Israeli strikes have targeted areas within Beirut's southern suburbs. On Thursday, airstrikes hit the Chuafat al-Amrouzi area, destroying 2 buildings and igniting large fires. The attacks followed evacuation warnings issued by Israel for areas known to be Hezbollah strongholds after intense strikes the night before. The Israeli military also announced the killing of a Hamas commander who was implicated in the assault on southern Israel on October 7th and had been working for the UN Relief Agency in Gaza. The UN agency confirmed that the individual, identified as Mohammed Abu Idawi, was a staff member and was killed during an Israeli operation. Notably, the Israeli authorities had previously sent a letter in July listing 100 staff members allegedly connected to armed groups, but without providing supporting evidence. French President Emmanuel Macron has cautioned Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, stating that civilization is not best defended by sowing barbarism ourselves. He pledged assistance in training an additional 6,000 Lebanese official forces and called for a ceasefire, condemning attacks on UN peacekeepers during a Paris conference that raised $200 million for Lebanon's military and $800 million in humanitarian aid for the country. Casualties and humanitarian crisis. The health ministry in Gaza reported that more than 770 Palestinians have been killed in the northern region since the latest offensive began on October 6. The agency announced it had to suspend rescue operations in northern Gaza due to threats from the Israeli military against rescue crews in Jabalia camp. Furthermore, reports indicate that over 42,847 Palestinians have been killed and more than 100,544 injured since the start of the war last year. The Jabalia refugee camp was struck by an Israeli airstrike Thursday night, resulting in an estimated 150 casualties, including women and children. The Civil Defense Agency's estimates highlighted the critical humanitarian crisis facing the region. Conclusion. As the situation in the Middle East deteriorates, the ongoing violence continues to exact a heavy toll on innocent lives. The deliberate targeting of journalists raises serious concerns about press freedom and the protection of those reporting in conflict zones. The international community must remain vigilant and engaged as it seeks to promote dialogue and humanitarian assistance. Efforts to secure a lasting peace and protect civilians are crucial as the region grapples with the consequences of these violent confrontations. In light of these developments, it is imperative to stay informed and actively support humanitarian initiatives aimed at aiding those affected by this ongoing conflict. Your engagement and awareness can play a vital role in advocating for peace and stability in this turbulent region. If you have any other requests or need further adjustments, just let me know. Condemnation of journalists' deaths in Lebanon. Lebanon's information minister Ziad Makari condemned the Israeli airstrike that killed 3 journalists, Ghassan Najjar and Mohammed Rida of Al-Mayadeen, and Wissam Qasim of Al-Mana, in Hasbea, labeling it a war crime. He stated that the attack was premeditated, occurring while the journalists were asleep in their guest house. Al-Mayadeen described Najjar as a dedicated father who was killed while striving to reveal the truth. Civilian casualties in Gaza. An Israeli airstrike on the southern city of Khan Yunis has reportedly killed at least 28 Palestinian civilians, with many more injured. The strike targeted a residential home in the Al-Manara neighborhood and is part of a broader pattern of Israeli attacks across Gaza, which have resulted in significant civilian casualties. Reports indicate that Israeli forces destroyed over 10 residential buildings in Jabalia, a region that has seen renewed military focus. The humanitarian crisis continues to escalate, with numerous casualties reported from ongoing attacks, including an airstrike on Kamal Adwan Hospital that resulted in additional deaths among children. Diplomatic efforts amid ongoing conflict. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is scheduled to meet with Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati and foreign ministers from Jordan and the UAE to discuss a post-war plan for Gaza. Blinken has stressed the need for Iran to understand the risks associated with further attacks on Israel. Meanwhile, Israeli officials have expressed intentions to discuss negotiations for the release of hostages held by Hamas. In Cairo, a senior Hamas official indicated that the group is willing to cease hostilities if Israel agrees to a ceasefire, withdraw from Gaza, and allow the return of displaced individuals, alongside other humanitarian considerations. At least 17 people, primarily women and children, have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a school sheltering displaced individuals in the Nuseirat refugee camp in central Gaza. The strike, which injured another 42 people according to Al-Adha Hospital, has been condemned as part of ongoing attacks on civilian infrastructure. Among the deceased were 13 children under 18 and 3 women. Israel's military claims the school was being used as a command and control center by Hamas. As tensions escalate, Iran has reportedly ordered its armed forces to prepare for potential conflict while aiming to avoid it, in light of the destruction faced by its allies in the region. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has instructed the military to devise various plans in response to any Israeli attacks, emphasizing that the scale of retaliation will depend on the severity of Israeli actions. In Lebanon, several Israeli airstrikes targeted areas in Beirut's southern suburbs after evacuation warnings were issued for Hezbollah strongholds. These strikes have led to the destruction of buildings and significant damage in the region. On another front, Israel announced the killing of a Hamas commander, Mohammed Abu Idawi, who had ties to the UN aid agency in Gaza. This incident has raised concerns regarding the targeting of humanitarian workers amid the conflict. French President Emmanuel Macron has urged Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to avoid actions that could further escalate violence, stating that civilization cannot be defended through barbarism. He also pledged support for Lebanese military forces and called for a ceasefire. The humanitarian toll in Gaza continues to rise, with Gaza's Civil Defense Agency reporting over 770 Palestinian deaths since October 6, amidst Israel's renewed offensive. Overall, Gaza's health ministry reports more than 42,847 Palestinians have been killed and over 100,544 injured since the conflict began last year. Recent airstrikes have resulted in substantial casualties, particularly in Jabalia refugee camp, where an attack has reportedly left around 150 people dead or injured. Middle East Crisis Live Update. Israeli airstrike kills 3 journalists in Lebanon. An Israeli airstrike early on Friday morning has reportedly killed 3 journalists in southern Lebanon, igniting widespread condemnation and accusations of a war crime. The victims, Ghassan Najjar and Mohammed Rida, both camera operators for the pro-Iranian channel Al Mayadeen, and Wissam Qassem, a camera operator for Hezbollah's Al Mana, were staying at a guest house in Hasbaya, where other reporters were also present. According to Lebanese media, the specific bungalow where these journalists were sleeping was directly targeted. In response to the incident, a Lebanese minister has labeled the killing of the journalists a war crime, underscoring the gravity of the situation. As the conflict escalates, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is scheduled to meet with Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati in London on Friday, along with foreign ministers from Jordan and the United Arab Emirates. The meetings aim to discuss a post-war plan for Gaza, with Blinken expressing hope that Iran receives a clear message regarding the repercussions of further attacks on Israel. This comes in light of Israel's commitment to retaliate against a missile barrage from Iran that occurred on October 1st. In another development, the head of Israel's Mossad intelligence agency, David Barnea, is set to travel to Doha on Sunday to engage in discussions with CIA Director William Burns and Qatar's Prime Minister. The talks are part of ongoing efforts to explore possibilities for negotiating the release of hostages held by Hamas, amidst a backdrop of stalled ceasefire discussions. Meanwhile, a senior official from Hamas revealed that the group's leadership in Doha is in talks with Egyptian officials regarding potential ideas for a Gaza truce. The official stated that Hamas is willing to cease hostilities, contingent upon Israel agreeing to a ceasefire, withdrawing from the Gaza Strip, allowing the return of displaced individuals, committing to a serious prisoner exchange, and permitting humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. In other critical developments, Israeli airstrikes have resulted in significant casualties in the Nuseirat refugee camp in central Gaza, where at least 17 people, primarily women and children, were killed. Reports indicate that among the deceased are 13 children under the age of 18. This strike marks a continuation of Israel's military operations against facilities purportedly being used by Hamas, with the Israeli military claiming that the school housing displaced individuals was being utilized as a command and control center by Hamas. As tensions rise, Iran has reportedly instructed its armed forces to prepare for potential conflict while also seeking to avoid escalation. Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has directed military officials to develop various plans in response to any Israeli attacks, with the scale of potential retaliation dependent on the intensity of Israeli military actions. Israeli airstrikes also targeted areas in Beirut's southern suburbs, with reports indicating significant destruction and civilian evacuations. The Israeli military has claimed responsibility for the strikes, which they allege were aimed at Hezbollah infrastructure. In a related incident, Israel confirmed the death of Mohammed Abu Idawi, a Hamas commander involved in the October 7th assault on southern Israel. He had previously worked for the UN aid agency in Gaza, raising concerns over the targeting of humanitarian workers. The UN agency confirmed his employment and stated that his name was included in a list of staff members alleged to have ties to armed groups. Amid these escalating tensions, French President Emmanuel Macron has cautioned Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu against perpetuating violence, stating that civilization cannot be defended through barbarism. Macron has also pledged to assist in training 6,000 additional Lebanese forces and called for an immediate ceasefire, along with an end to Israeli assaults on UN peacekeepers. A recent conference in Paris has raised $200 million for Lebanon's military and $800 million in humanitarian aid. As of Thursday, Gaza's Civil Defense Agency reported that over 770 Palestinians have been killed in northern Gaza since Israel intensified its offensive on October 6. They also indicated that operations in the region have been suspended due to threats from the Israeli military against rescue crews. Overall, Gaza's health ministry reported a staggering toll, with 42,847 Palestinians killed and 100,544 injured since the beginning of the conflict last year. Additionally, an airstrike on the Jabalia refugee camp late Thursday night resulted in significant casualties, with estimates suggesting that around 150 individuals, including women and children, were killed or injured. These developments highlight the ongoing humanitarian crisis and the urgent need for diplomatic efforts to bring about a ceasefire. Kamal Adwan Hospital faces critical shortages amid ongoing conflict. The Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza has run out of medical supplies, as reported by Al Jazeera. Alongside the Indonesian and Al-Adha hospitals, it is grappling with severe shortages of fuel and essential medical resources due to relentless Israeli attacks over recent weeks. The situation is dire, especially with sweeping evacuation orders affecting hundreds of thousands of residents in northern Gaza. Accusations against Israel have intensified, with claims that these actions constitute a war crime aimed at forcibly displacing the remaining population. Hussam Abu Safia, the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital, stated that the facility's warehouse is now empty, leaving it unable to perform urgent surgeries. Most of the hospital surgeons have reportedly been arrested by Israeli forces, further complicating the already critical medical situation. Recently, the Israeli military surrounded the hospital and fired shells at the building, causing severe damage to the ICU and emergency department. The attack compromised the hospital's oxygen station, threatening the lives of 150 wounded individuals and 14 newborns relying on incubators for survival. Reports indicate that Israeli forces are conducting mass arrests within the hospital, detaining men for interrogation. In related military actions, the Israeli army confirmed the deaths of 5 soldiers in southern Lebanon during combat, bringing the total Israeli soldier fatalities in the region to 32 since September 30th. Border crossings impacted by Israeli airstrikes. Lebanon's transport minister, Ali Hami, reported that an Israeli airstrike has rendered the Ka crossing between Lebanon and Syria inoperable, leaving only one official border crossing functional. This follows a previous airstrike that made the Masna border crossing impassable. These crossings have been vital for civilians fleeing the violence, with hundreds of thousands displaced by Israeli bombardments.